And we're live.
We're live.
Yay!
Yay!
Well, hi everybody. Thank you for joining.
Hi.
Just so you guys are aware, today we have a fantastic Q&A with Miss Ariel Willow.
Hi. Hello.
So I think we're just going to start off by quick going around introducing ourselves. I'm just going to really quick, just regarding Epicedium Paranormal in general. I'm just going to say, so we're a client-based paranormal team. However, our tagline is investigating the unknown, because to us, paranormal isn't just ghosties, it's everything that we're not sure about. So we're all about research and having these types of open discussions where we can learn more. And the paranormal community is all about learning and growing and figuring stuff out. So that's what we're going to do.
Yay!
So just quick, really first, my name's Gail. I'm one of the founders of Epicedium, and yeah, that's about it for me.
I'm Brittany. As you know, I've been speaking to you through email. I'm a founder as well, and I'm the research manager and head of social media. So, yay.
Yay.
Tim.
And my name is Tim. I am one of the newer people on the team. This is not my first team, but Gail and Ron and Brittany, I believe you as well. We all had worked for a previous team, not at the same time, but we come from similar background there. And when Epicedium came together, it was like the perfect fit. And I love these guys, and I'm happy to be here, man.
Yay!
My name is Ariel Willow, and I am a YouTuber and spiritual lifestyle coach on TikTok and YouTube. I have been in the paranormal field professionally since about 2015. So I've been with a group since then, but I've also done investigations on my own and just been able to see spirit and interact with it since I was a little girl. So it's just something that has suddenly become the focus of my life, which is great. But yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. It's super exciting, and we all love your videos on.
Oh, thank you.
Definitely.
I try to make it look like I spend a lot of time on them. I don't. I'm just naturally funny.
Well, it shows.
I love it.
So for anybody who's watching live right now with us, we do have an open comment section. So as we're going through our questions, feel free to shoot one over to us, and Miss Brittany will be fielding them. Well, Miss Brittany.
Yes. Thank you, Brittany.
I feel like I'm in one of those Brady Bunch, the beginning where I'm just like,
right? Yes, this is very Brady Bunch-ish.
Yes.
Definitely.
It's very similar to that.
Yeah. So if for anyone who can't watch live, we are going to be recording this interview, and we will be sharing the link on all of our social media platforms. Yes. So don't worry if you're missing out, because you'll be able to catch later and get some really cool information and feedback from all of us.
Yeah. Hello.
Yes, someone's already saying hi.
Okay, so just in general, we're going to be talking about not just ghosty paranormal, but all kinds of paranormal, or really just anything of the unknown, which from if anyone has watched Ariel's videos, you can tell she has the full gamut of
everything, including aliens. Little UFO.
We have a section on questions about spacey stuff, so don't you worry.
I'm so honored. I was about to wear my shirt with the little Starry Night sky, like Starry Night by Van Gogh with little aliens in it, but I didn't. I chose the simple shirt.
Oh, I mean, both would have been fantastic, but
right? It's so adorable. I cannot. It's so cute. It's so cute.
Oh, it's so funny. Okay, so we're just going to start with some of the more general questions.
Yeah. Throw it out.
Which for us is more of the paranormal ghosty type. And first one up is Mr. Chin.
All right, Ariel. That Starry Night shirt with aliens, that's awesome, by the way.
Right? It's adorable. It's adorable. I love it. I adore it. It's so cute. I saw it at Ross and I was like, I need to go into debt for this shirt. I can't live without it.
Love it.
Haven't regretted it since.
So I guess our first question is in regards to your abilities. How did they start? How did they progress? Could you just give us some insight there?
Yeah. So since I was a little girl, I've been seeing things, and obviously as a kid, you don't realize that it's weird because you're a kid. You're just experiencing life however it comes at you. And I didn't realize it was not normal for people to see what I was seeing until there was one day I remember vividly. I was sitting at the kitchen table eating breakfast across from my mom, and I think she was reading a book or something. And I said, "Mom, who are the other people in our house?" And she said, "What? What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, there's a big dark man, and there's a lady in a white dress, and there's Hannah." And she said, "I don't understand what you mean. What do you mean there's other people?" And I said, "Well, they're here right now." And she said, "Where?" And I said, "Well, they're right there." And she said, "Oh, honey, you're just dreaming." And I was like, "But Mom, I'm awake." Like, I was very confused because to me, I was just seeing it, and she obviously wasn't. And years later, when I asked her about it, she said, "To be honest, I didn't know what to say because that's really creepy to hear your kid be like, oh yeah, they're standing right there. Why don't you see them?"
Right.
But what was really interesting to me is that throughout my life, I had had all of these experiences, including seeing a family member after they had died. The day that they passed away, I saw them with what I know now was Archangel Azrael, the angel of death. And I didn't realize it at the time that I was seeing them after they had passed, because I just saw them in the room and I was like, "Oh, hey, how you doing?" And then I realized later that they had passed, and I just was having all these experiences, and I didn't realize that it wasn't just me. Like, my sister actually experienced the same things, and years later, like maybe two years ago, we came together and she was like, "You know what? The day that our loved one passed, do you remember anything weird?" And I was like, "Weird? How so?" And she was like, "Well, I just remember seeing them standing there." And I was like, "Yeah." And they were like, "With a man?" And I said, "In a dark suit with dark hair." And she said, "Yeah." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah." We saw that. But it was all these little confirmations that happened later in my life to validate the experiences that I had growing up that I wouldn't have known about. That things like Hannah, the little ghost that was in the house growing up, she was always telling me about her father who was at the mines and he was coming home soon, and she didn't know when he was coming home, but she was waiting. And I was like, "What the heck? Like, we're in the middle of a cow field. Like, where's this mine?" And I didn't understand what she was talking about. And it was really hard for me to get history on the house because we were renting and the landlord only was able to tell us so much. And my parents didn't really dig, and I was trying to find records on the local records on the house, and there was just really nothing. It was a really old house, and had come down in two parts. So the original part was a stable and ranch hand housing quarters, and then it was expanded on in the 50s to become like an actual house. And so there was so much history that was just kind of lost in that experience and that transition that it had. So there was not a lot of clear cut history for the timelines of it. So I just kind of gave up trying to find any kind of confirmation for what I was experiencing until I think it was 3 years ago, maybe. I was visiting with my mom, and I mentioned the little ghost girl, and how she would talk about her dad in the mines. And she said, "Oh, that's really interesting because the house, the original part of the house actually came from Virginia City." And I said, "Excuse me?" And she was like, "Yeah, Virginia City, the mining town up like an hour from here." And I was like, you never thought to tell me this? I was like, I literally thought I was crazy. But that was a huge confirmation for me because I had no idea. I hadn't even been to Virginia City at that point in my life. So there was no connection that I would have had to that area. And it was really, really interesting to get that random confirmation years and years later down the line.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really cool.
She traveled with the house, like
yeah.
Yeah. That's very cool. Very cool.
Love it. Love that. All right. Next question. What went into your decision to share your abilities with the public through your YouTube and TikTok accounts?
Oh man. Well, I've always been an oversharer. I share everything, probably too much of my life with the public. Like, I'm the kind of person where you meet me and 5 minutes later and I'm like, do you want me to start with the light trauma or the deep trauma? But I guess part of the biggest reason why I chose to share it was because I felt so incredibly isolated growing up and experiencing what I did and not having anybody else that I could go to ask questions or see that they were having similar things happening to them. And one thing that I've really noticed a lot in not only the spiritual communities, but also with people who experience spirit on a more physical or auditory or whatever level that they do, is that there's a lot of gatekeeping that happens with information. And I'm not really sure why that is. Because in my mind, the more that you share, the more that you can learn and the more that everybody can grow together. And I think gatekeeping information kind of keeps everybody at these weird levels that people aren't able to get past because they don't have access to information. And then they, do what they can, and then people criticize them for how they're dealing with things. So, for example, spirit boards is one subject that comes up a lot for people. And I talk to people about it freely because a lot of people are like, oh, just don't use them. And that's all that they say. Whereas you can actually use them and have really good experiences, but it's just depending on how you use it. And so giving people the experiences that you've had with those things and helping them to use it safely is so much more useful than just saying, oh, don't use it. Because you know what happens when you tell people something to not do something, they're going to want to do it. Yep. So if you give them the tools to use to do it safely, then they either will have the like less of a want to do it, or when they do it, they'll do it safely. So I much rather have it be that I share as much as I can to help people, one, not feel so weird and alone, but two, just feel like they actually have the power to grow in their spiritual practice and in their lives, because the more, like, knowledge is power, right? And the more you know, the more you can grow. And if you don't know a lot, then it's not as exciting because you don't have anywhere to go in your spiritual path. You just are kind of stagnant. So definitely just trying to make people feel a little bit less crazy.
Yeah.
One piece of information at a time.
I love it.
Yeah. No, and that, and that's why we love doing these types of conversations, because we're of the same mindset, like that you need to be able to, just in general, not just paranormal world, but people in general, feel safe and comfortable talking about it, because that's the only way you really know how to learn and grow.
Right.
So,
right.
It's important to be open-minded as well when having these conversations. Because I'll admit, I can say that as a group, when we hear somebody use the Ouija board or something, we're like, hey.
Yeah, you're like, oh, why'd you do that, Karen? It's like, yeah, absolutely, I get it, and that's it can be scary, and I always tell people because there's so many subjects out there that like Ouija boards or even demons that people hear and they're like, oh, let's distance ourselves from that, instead of actually being like, oh, well, what was your experience with it? Like going in with curiosity for things that are unknown to you, or that you've maybe had bad experiences with, is so much more beneficial than just shutting yourself off from it. Because what you're doing is like, when you have bad experiences with something, just as a human brain, you naturally create a barrier against it, right? Like, oh, I touched the stove, my hand got hurt, so I'm not going to do that again. So you like put a barrier against that temptation to do that again because you know the outcome. But if you have an outcome with something like a pendulum or a Ouija board, or even getting a reading from someone, you naturally, human wise, just create that barrier in your mind because you've had a bad experience with it, just like we do with dating and life in general. If we have a bad experience with something, we just close it off. And that's why so many people have had paranormal experiences and spiritual gifts when they were growing up, and slowly they deteriorate because you're naturally closing yourself off to something that you're fearful of.
Right.
And fear is a huge block for people, spiritually and emotionally and everything like that. So the more scared you are of something, the more fear that's created, the less you're going to want to learn about it because you already feel that you know the outcome. And so a lot of people are like, well, how can I open up my abilities? How can I advance, my everything? And I'm just like, you just have to not be afraid to experience things. Like, just knowledge, like get all of the knowledge that you can and information you can about spirit so that you're less afraid of it. And you see it happen all the time in the paranormal fields. When people join a paranormal group and they start having more experiences, they actually become less afraid and start having more experiences because they have less fear going in.
Right. It's very true. And I have to say, probably this year in general has, caused a lot of people to go into their bubbles.
Yes. And it's very hermit year.
It's, some people have taken that and gone with it and taken it to use it as your growth to learn more about themselves. And then you have the others who kind of, like you said, hermit off and they're in their bubble. And understandably, it's a very fearful, depressing time. And that kind of leads us into our next question for you, which is kind of, how have you seen this year being as filled with such negativity and bad energy as it has been? How have you seen that affect not only you, but like energy in general and your abilities and whatnot?
Well, I feel like I think I've been dealing with so many things and experiences in my own personal life that have, one, I guess, helped me expand even more in my abilities because I needed to rely on spirit more this year than I think I've ever had in the past. But also just seeing how much support other people are getting. Because when I'm out in public, I can see people's guides and angels and spirit animals around them. And it's really funny because I don't think I've seen this many around people as constantly as I have this year. Like, spirit has really just put full force into people's lives without them really even noticing it. And like just earlier, I was at Starbucks and this lady was like swatting above her head, and she was like, and I just was seeing this like little light bulb over her head, and I was just like, okay, well, it's there. It's people are seeing more and experiencing more because they are in hermit mode, right? They're just kind of self-isolated, which makes you more aware of your environment. But it's been a lot more supportive of us, but I also think it's also been more present but more hands-off than it has before, because I honestly really think that as a society, having lockdowns, as annoying as it can be, has actually helped us grow a lot spiritually. So much. Like, like I said, people are in hermit mode, they're at home, they're experiencing a lot more paranormal experiences because they're at home more. And the things that they wouldn't notice because they would be at work all day are the things that they're noticing now. And they're like, wait, what's going on? Like, it's easy when you're at work all day and then you come home and you hear something fall in your house, being like, oh, I wonder if it was like a small earthquake or something. Whereas when you're at home all day and you have 5 things falling off the wall, you're like, what is going on? Like, what's happening? And it actually causes people to have these spiritual awakenings because they're having a lot more exposure to those things that they wouldn't have had before.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So
Living with cats, I always blame it on them when I hear weird sounds.
yes, you're like, how are they acting? Are you guys freaking out?
So funny.
Yeah.
But it is comforting knowing that spirit's kind of around us.
Yeah.
But that actually leads us into our next question, which Tim has for you regarding spirit.
Yep. So my next question would be, how would you describe spirit, and why do you think that some spirits stay behind?
So, oh wow, this is a loaded question. Okay, so buckle in, kids. So magic school bus, right? So, spirit is a general term. I call it an umbrella term that I use for so many things, because spirit in general is what I call the energy that we all come from, right? Whether you are a creature, a human, an angel, an alien, whatever it is, we all come from spirit or source or the universe or God, however you want to portray it. And the way that I describe it is spirit is something that, because some people are like, well, what's the one true religion? And I'm like, well, that's a loaded question. And I said, well, if you look at this cup from this point of view, what are you seeing? You're seeing part of the label, you're seeing part of this cup, like you're seeing this angle, right? But if someone was to turn it and see it from this point of view, what are you seeing? You're seeing the label on a different side than the other person is, but it's still the same label, it's still the same cup, but you're seeing different parts of that same cup. Just the way that you would see this part of this box, right, from this point of view, but from this point of view, you're not seeing that picture that the other person is seeing, but it's the same box. So that's the way that spirit is. Each religion, each different belief is seeing the same thing from different points of view. So you're seeing different aspects of the same thing, which is why all of the stories are very similar. All of the energies are very similar, but they're all different in the way that people can interpret them from that point of view. So it's why you see a lot of similarities with like the martyr stories and things like that in the Bible and in different cultures, because you're having that same storyline being interpreted in different ways. So spirit in general is an energy. It's not a sentient being, in my opinion. It's just something that we all are, that is the one tiny string that connects everything. And then from there, you have, source beings, incarnated beings. So us as humans would be something that I consider is an incarnated being, because we're separate from source, but we are from source. Whereas angels are source beings, which is just a being that is straight from source. They never actually incarnate into a physical body. They're just straight from that. Spirit guides are things that are beings that have incarnated in physical lifetimes, but they are on an astral level helping us in our physical lives. So all of your spirit guides are actually beings that knew you in past lives. So for example, like a mom that you have in this lifetime who passes over might be a spirit guide for you in the next lifetime as that mom that you had in this lifetime. But the why spirit stays behind is a really good question. And there's a lot of information with this, because we've only gotten half through the information about that. So when you have, I need a visual. Visuals are my friend. Okay.
Awesome.
And everybody else's friend.
Yes.
Oh, I'll use pens. Pens are great. Okay. So.
I love it.
So if you have, let's use a bunch of different colors. Okay. So if you have 3 pens, you're the pink pen. We're going to be a pink pen now. Okay. So when you incarnate into your first lifetime, right, you have all of the 3 colors with you. We'll add 4 for spice. Okay. So we have 4 pens. You are 4 pens incarnating into a physical lifetime, right? And when you experience that lifetime, you're experiencing that lifetime as these 4 pens. However, when you cross over, what you do is, like, let's say you have an experience in that lifetime that's traumatic, like you die from getting beheaded. I'm sorry I use that example, but we'll just use that. It's a traumatic thing that your spirit goes through. So what happens is part of your energy is left behind in that experience, which is where like the stone tape theories and stuff like that come from. And then the rest of you incarnates, right? So let's say that you go into another lifetime and you are experiencing it as these 3 pens, and then you have something else, like you have a loving family that you want to remember during that lifetime, so you leave part of your spirit behind, which is the ghost that they interact with, right? So this rest of you can incarnate still, but with these 2 things. All of a sudden you start having these weird memories of like being in this lifetime or being in this lifetime, and you're like, where are these memories coming from? So you do past life regression or past life readings or something like that, and you learn about the life where you were a mother and you left behind your spirit. So by acknowledging that, what you're doing is you're pulling that energy back to here. So because it's not really necessary to have it in that timeline anymore, because everybody has passed on, everybody's moved on, right? So that energy can be retrieved. And if you have a past life like this, like let's say it's really traumatic and it has a lot of energy left behind, you can still retrieve that energy to here by doing past life regressions and stuff. But the energetic signature, the stone tape part, is going to be left behind because it's such a traumatic and soaked up event by that area that it's going to just keep repeating that. But the sentient part that would be there is going to be gathered back with your current self. So with that, people are like, well, why am I still interacting with my Grandma Sarah if Grandma Sarah might have reincarnated into a plant already, you know? and the reason is because when we cross over, we can leave a part of our souls behind that is that person that we were from that lifetime that can interact with people. And it's more connected to like this part of us has incarnated into a new lifetime as a rose. We'll use that as an example. And then this part of you is the part you left behind, and this is your higher self. Your higher self is always going to be in the spirit realm. It never goes anywhere else. It never incarnates. So your current self is connected to your higher self, but it's also connected to this past self, which is why you can still interact and have interactions with a sentient being or spirit while that person has already incarnated. But it also depends on soul families, which is like a whole other thing. It's like all of these little rabbit trails. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. But
that was a fantastic answer, and I love the visuals because that does help you.
It helps me so much. I use metaphors all the time, and visuals really are helpful because some people just I'm a visual learner. Like if you try to tell me something, I'm just like, okay, wait, what? Grandma Sarah, what? Whereas like if you see, different visual representations, it makes it so much easier to understand. So it's very much about metaphors and visual presentations of something.
And it's actually the first time I've ever heard it explained where, you're only leaving a piece behind, so like there's, I hear about these hauntings and, there's times when they're, I feel bad. I'm like, oh, what, they can't cross over. I feel bad.
And that's
now I know that they're still okay.
Right. And that's a really common question that people have is like, oh, I'm getting messages from my family member and I'm worried that they're stuck. And to be honest, through my 29 years of living, I have only crossed over like 5 spirits. And all of the rest have just been visiting or have purposefully wanted to stay behind. And what happens, so this is so much information, but just hold with me, please. So when you when you die from your physical body and your spirit body separates from the physical body, like you don't need that thing anymore, then you're met with a spirit guide, an angel, your higher self, like whoever is there, the angel of death, Anubis, the Grim Reaper, whatever you believe in. and they meet you and they're like, hey, so you did, do you want to cross over, or what do you want to do? And so you have to give them an answer of like whether you want to cross over or not. And if you choose no, then this is when you go into like that limbo state. And I say that in quotations because you're not really in limbo. You can cross over whenever you want, but people spirits tend to stay in the limbo state because they're afraid of crossing over. Like if you have any fear about being judged for what you did in this lifetime, or if you've done something really bad like murder or something like that, where you're like, oh, I'm gonna be judged, we're gonna go over, so I'm just gonna stay right here where I know it's safe. Then there's a lot of spirits of bad people that have stayed behind and never actually crossed over because they don't want to deal with what's going to happen on the other side. But what they don't know is that when you get to the other side, you really don't care. You just don't care about it at all, because you don't experience emotions and feelings the same way that you would on a physical level in the spirit realm. In the spirit realm, you know exactly why you made the decisions that you made. You know exactly how the other people felt in the situations, in the decisions that you made. You know exactly what was happening with other people in your life at the time of your lifetime. And you know exactly what was going on with you emotionally, mentally, everything like that. So you essentially have this book opened up of all of the information that you would want in this lifetime to process what you're going through in this lifetime when you go over. So when you pass over, if you choose yes, that's when you cross over to the other side, because it's essentially just a sandwich on top of our reality. But that's when you actually go through the soul process where you're going through reviewal and things like that and doing all of those things. But that's where people can kind of get confused about like limbo and being stuck. But no spirit is actually stuck. It's just a matter of a decision of crossing over or knowing that they can. Because sometimes when they go to the limbo state, they don't realize that they can cross over. Which is why they say that they're stuck, because they don't know how to do that, and that's when you would cross a spirit over. But typically it's just because they decided to stay behind because they just want to mess with us.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm loving your answers, because our next question was actually about crossing spirit. You kind of already addressed
Well,
that.
there you go.
That was fantastic, because as a paranormal community, you know, we talk with different groups all the time, and we have kind of had that discussion where some groups believe in crossing spirit and
Right.
some don't, because they're like, I'm not going to cross them because I don't know where I'm sending them.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Well,
like
the good thing is that because spirit is all essentially the same thing, there's not really any wrong way to cross a spirit over. There are people, like I personally have crossed spirits over, but for the most part, I'm just like, hey, yo, Archangel Azrael, can you escort this person? Because I just don't feel like doing it. It takes a lot of energy. But because you gotta like open the other side is like really complicated. So I'm just like, here is this person. It's 2 a.m. I can't deal with it. You deal with it. You take the baby. But that's really as simple as it is. Like if you have a spirit that's in your home, and you are worried that it might be stuck or it might be, upset or something like that, you can always call an Archangel Azrael, Anubis, what's the other one? The Grim Reaper. You can always just call on spirit in general. Whatever your belief is that would be the person that you would believe that would cross people over, you can just call on them and ask them to cross that spirit over. But the other thing that I want to mention, which they're like, wait, so this is probably another question that you guys had. So with experiences where you're having trouble getting rid of something in your house or in your space, like you're cleansing, you're doing all the things, you're doing all the crystals, you're doing all the prayers, you had a priest come in and things are still happening and you're like, what the hell is going on? I has bad news. It's probably there for a reason. Because if there's something like angels, you can't cleanse out of a space. Spirit guides, you also can't cleanse out of the space. Anything like you can clear out everything other than spirit guides and angels, and beings like that, because they just, you can't do it. But you can you can set parameters around your space or around your property that only let those things in and not any human spirits. But a lot of people wonder, like, well, I'm still having things fly off the shelves and I've done all this cleansing. Why is that? And I was like, have you ever tried asking why it's there? Because sometimes it's your spirit guide being like, listen, your house is about to burn down. I've tried throwing 5 books and you're still not getting out. And they're like, dang, I wonder why this keeps happening. And they don't think to ask, like, hey, is there a message you have for me? Like, is there something that you need to tell me? And sometimes it's our family members coming through and being like, listen, I have this really important message to let you know. Like, I just want to let you know that I'm okay. But by them knocking things over or closing doors, they're trying to get our attention, and they're not actually trying to scare us, but it scares us because we don't know what's going on. So that's why I actually always get really excited when people are having activity. And people are like, well, how do I get rid of it? And I'm like, no. How do you talk to it? Like, how do you interact with it? Like, this is such a paranormal investigator thing to do, is be like, oh yeah, let me get out my equipment. Like, let's do it. Whereas other people are like, no, I just wanted to leave. But that also goes into poltergeists, which is completely different. Poltergeists are actually commonly assumed to be spirits, and that's not what they are. They are actually energy that is created from suppressed trauma, and people don't realize that. It's and that's another reason why a lot of people who have cleansings and stuff like that are still having these things happen, and they're like, oh, I have a poltergeist. And I'm like, what have you not worked through? Like, is there trauma? Have you seen a therapist? Have you seen a psychiatrist? Because when you have trauma, like, what happens when you have a very traumatic experience is your aura goes like this. Like, it expands really quickly. So like when you get scared, it expands like this really fast, and it outputs a lot of energy. The same way that happens when you're angry or really happy and excited. Which is why after those experiences, we feel really tired and really drained and really depleted. So when that happens, when you go through trauma, what you're doing is you're taking that energy that outputs and you're sucking it in, and then you're pushing it down, and you're stuffing it into a suitcase. And that suitcase is eventually not going to be able to close. There's just going to be too much in there that's going to be stuffed away, and it's going to start leaking out. And when it starts leaking out, what's left is something that you can't personally take on. So your subconscious pushes it and categorizes it into a subcategory. And that subcategory actually becomes separate from your physical body and your energetic body, and starts becoming this separate entity that takes on a life of its own, which then starts getting so powerful the more you do that it starts actually being able to move things and cause things to happen. And the only reason why it does that is to get your attention. And commonly what you'll see is that if people have poltergeist activity, it's around the time that they're teenagers, or they're having these major transitions in their life, like maybe they've had a death recently, or they just got over cancer, or things like that, where it's these emotional situations where they're suppressing all this thing, these feelings and these experiences. And then that poltergeist is created and starts causing chaos. And once they work through those things and address those things and address those feelings, then all of a sudden the activity just planes. Like, it just is like, oh, well, now that we've worked on that, good. See ya when you have more trauma, like it's already just worked through. And
right.
So it's actually, well, it might be scarier than people think it is, but it's actually not as scary, in my opinion, when you know that, because it gives you a way of working through it and actually getting rid of it, instead of just trying to patch a bullet hole with a Band-Aid.
Right. So. It's funny because everything you've brought up, it's kind of come full circle, like in terms of spirit, right. Saying all that, it literally boils down to our experiences and the energy we output from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's very common for people to see mental health as separate from spiritual experiences when it's so integrated. It's so integrated in each other. And I think it's silly when people are like, well, you're crazy, like you're schizophrenic. And I'm just like, but literally like so much of this has to do with mental health and how we deal with our experiences and our energy and everything like that. And it really comes down to mindfulness. Like, what are we experiencing? What are we feeling? And how can we deal with those things so that we can address these problems before they come up? It's really interesting to see the correlation between the two. And yeah, it's very commonly assumed that they're separate. They're not separate. They're the same thing.
We actually have a few questions.
Yeah, go for it.
Came in. So we have 2 from YouTube. And the one was, what about learning to accept your gifts? Will that help you as well, along with not being scared?
Yes. So,
good question.
I think, yeah, that is a really good question. People have such good questions. Like, it makes me actually so proud. Like, you guys are great. When you have an ability, I'm going to try to think of something that's pretty common. So clairsentient or clairsentience is clear feeling. It's different than clear empathy. So this is a common misconception. Clear empathy or being empathic is actually different than clairsentience or clear feeling. So clear empathy is very related to feeling emotions and experiencing the same emotions that someone else is having. So clear empathy is where you are the blue pen and someone else is the turquoise pen. You are feeling those feelings that the turquoise pen is feeling at such a level that you basically become the turquoise pen while they're experiencing that. And it's very hard to separate that energy and experience your own feelings separate unless you bubble or like you protect yourself energetically. However, if you are clairsentient, you are the purple pen with a turquoise pen. The turquoise pen is feeling turquoise pen feelings, but the purple pen is able to feel what the turquoise pen is because purple is part of blue, right? It uses that color scheme, but it's able to recognize that that is just separate. Like you're able to feel feelings without feeling those feelings yourself. You're able to sense them. So it's sensing things and being aware of things, which clairsentience is actually feeling energy rather than experiencing it. So you can be clairsentient and empathic at the same time, but they're two separate things. And so when you have something like clairaudience, which is clear hearing, it's really common for people to be like, I'm hearing voices in my head, I'm crazy. Like that's just it. And I do want to mention, like, if you're hearing voices that are encouraging you to hurt yourself or others, I do strongly urge you to like see a therapist, talk to a doctor, just because I want you guys to be safe. Like it's nothing where I'm just like, oh, don't care about seeing a doctor. Like I'm all for talking to therapists and trying to get a diagnosis if there's something mentally health related to that. But if you haven't had them ask you to do anything destructive or hurting yourself or others, what are the voices saying? Like, are they instructing you like, hey, walk on the left side of the street, and then you do that, and then a car drives up on the sidewalk on the other side? Or maybe you are in a store and you hear a voice say, oh, let this person go ahead of you, and you let them go ahead of you, and then that person like is able to meet an appointment that they were going to be late for otherwise. So it's different things where they're actually helping you to do things in your life and helping you to be a better person and helping you to better your own life by listening to that. And that can be scary because our society really strongly urges us to not listen to our intuition. Like it's very much about like numbing ourselves to just experience life on a very numb level rather than actually listening to our instincts and our feelings. And that's why so many people have regrets, because they are going through a situation and they're like, I knew it was wrong. I knew it was bad. I knew it was a bad situation, but I didn't get out when I heard that, when I felt that. And so by following your intuition and following the gut instincts that you have, because that is intuition, you're literally listening to your abilities. And the more you listen and try to understand and hear your abilities, the stronger they're going to get. Because what you're doing is instilling a habit. You're being more mindful. Mindfulness practices in general, which is why so many people recommend meditation to help you expand your abilities. And it's not because, meditation helps us get in contact with spirit. That's part of it. But really what it is understanding your basic soul level and your basic feelings so strongly that when something is different, then you're able to tell right away. And that's what meditation does. It's a mindfulness practice. It's used in CBT all the time, cognitive behavioral therapy. And cognitive behavioral therapy is literally just mindfulness. It's just about understanding how you're feeling, why you're feeling that, and what's going on that could be causing that, so that when you do feel separate feelings, you're like, oh, where is this coming from? And you're able to investigate it without being like, oh, I don't know why I'm feeling that. I'm just going to push it away because it must be wrong. And so I would like anybody who wants to expand on their gifts and get more familiar with their gifts as well as expand them, just start doing mindfulness practices. I know it seems silly and kind of tedious and time consuming because it doesn't feel like you're directly going to the goal, but it is the bubble outside of expanding your abilities. Like you have to get through that bubble and be more mindful about what's going on in your everyday than before you can even get to the inside of that bubble. People are so shocked when I'm like, oh, Demille is running around the room, and they're like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, I can see him out of the corner of my eye running around the room, but people who kind of shut that out might see that, but they don't acknowledge it because they just are like, oh, it's just a floater in my vision,
Right.
Instead of actually trying to figure out what it is. And it's really just about being open to experiencing things that sometimes we just can't explain with logical explanations.
I love this. So deep.
We go in the deep end.
Like, we are in the rabbit hole.
I'm not a shallow swimmer. Give me a deep pool and I'll go in. Like, not even feet first, head first. Like,
I love
we're just
it.
going all the way in.
Some of these are already addressing some of the questions that we have, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
And so we're right there with you. We're right there with you, and we want to be here. So it's all good.
Give me a diving board.
All right. Well, we have another one from YouTube.
Do it.
Do you believe that you're judged when you pass, or that all is able to count for their sin and be forgiven?
This is actually a really good question. So I get so excited about questions. All right. So I imagine this person is asking this because either they've done something in their life that they regret, or they've had something done to them that they wish that person will get judgment for. No judgment. Like, I get you. I got people like that in my life too. I understand. I'm just like, okay, karma, you're taking a really long time. So when you go over, if you have experienced something in your lifetime, like, I'm going to use a really extreme example because that's the easiest and most black and white. If you murdered someone in this lifetime and you pass over and you choose to cross over and not stay in like the limbo state, right? What's going to happen is you're going to be met with your spirit guides and angels and everything like that. And keep in mind, again, referencing to what we talked about earlier, when you go to the other side, you experience things and emotions and human things in a very different way. You're able to know what those emotions are, but you're not feeling them on a physical level. So you're able to see them and separate them from your body in a third person view. So the guilt that you feel, or the guilt that they feel, is actually taken away from them. And as a soul, they're able to see what they did and say, okay, I see that I did that. Obviously, it was wrong. But this also ties into life experiences and why things happen. The saying of like, everything happens for a reason is true. Even bad stuff. Like trauma, in my case, like abusive situations, I actually chose that on a soul level. And a lot of people get confused about this because they're like, okay, hold the phone. Why the hell would I choose to have cancer? I get it. I not on the cancer level. I'm sorry you're going through that, but in the way that if you hadn't got that cancer, if you hadn't gone through that experience, if you hadn't had a loved one that was murdered, if you hadn't had the car accident that took your leg, if you hadn't had someone shot and killed, would you be the same person that you are today without that experience happening? And if you were, would you be able to have experienced and done the things that you have as a person without that experience? There's people who lose a loved one to cancer and they start cancer fundraisers to help raise money to find a cure for cancer. There's people who lose a loved one from a gunshot who press for better charges in courts, which cause other people to get justice that they wouldn't have gotten if they didn't have that in place. There are people who have lost their legs in battle or in a car accident. And by losing that, they've gained confidence in themselves because they've gone through a hard situation that they've overcome. Or maybe they're more open to mental health issues because they've dealt with a lot of that from that experience that helps them become more understanding to other people who are going through the same experience. So there's so many reasons why things happen, and people are very eager to focus on one little aspect of it when you really have to look at the big picture of like how things have really caused us to be who we are today. And I wouldn't be as open about trauma and everything that I experience if I hadn't experienced those things. And by experiencing those things, I am who I am today, and I'm more compassionate towards people who are experiencing those things and have experienced those things because I've gone through the same things. And so our experiences are not our own. They're everybody's. And it feels very singular, and it is in a way, but it also is so encompassing of everybody on the planet because everybody benefits or is affected by what happens to us personally. You see it with the global pandemic. Like, we are going to be different people that we weren't at the beginning of this pandemic from what we've learned, either from being in self-isolation or experiences that we had or losing loved ones. And it doesn't mean that everything that you go through that's hard is right, or that it's justified, or that it was okay for that to happen. And it's not about that. It's about how it changes us and how it causes us to be the people that we are today. So going back to what happens when they go over to the other side, if you have a murderer that goes to the other side, they do the review, and usually it takes longer than for regular souls that go through. Not regular, that was the bad word to use, but you know what I mean. The average soul goes through, and they see exactly what happened and why they made that decision and what was going on that caused them to make that decision. They also see what happened in that victim's life, as well as their family's life and everything like that. And then when they go into the next lifetime, they either have to experience something that affects them the same way that the victim was affected in that lifetime in their next lifetime, or they experience the same thing. So it's kind of like this vicious cycle, but a cycle that helps us all kind of even out the scores, essentially. So if they didn't get judgment in this lifetime, they'll get it in the next. I promise. Because spirit is really not about judgment. It's about learning. Right. And it's about like, what's a good word? It's just about like the gray areas. There's really no black and white with spirit. There's just gray and bad. You don't want to deal with it. Like, there's no good and bad. And that's why it makes me actually really sad when people are like, oh, well, if there's no bad, like the demons are bad. And I'm like, okay. Oh, that's a different subject. I was like, have you ever experienced one? And they're like, well, yeah, it was a bad experience. And I was like, are you sure it was a demon? And they're like, well, yeah, it used 3. And I was like, 3 itself is actually not a bad number. I was like, okay, what else? And they're like, well, it said 666. And I was like, do you know that 666 is actually a good number? It's actually like a lucky number. if you look it up in numerology, and they're like, well, okay, but it said like it cursed Jesus's name, and I'm like, do you say oh my God every day? Do you like they're just being honest with their feelings, and they're like, okay, well it's from the devil, and I'm like, what is the devil? And they're like, well, it's the leader of hell, and I'm like, what if hell didn't exist? And they're like, well, it's what wants us to pull away from God. And I'm like, okay, but what if God was the same as the devil? And they're like, Ariel, let me have my feelings. And I'm like, okay, but really, the devil is not an entity. It's actually society's way of having a moderator for what we do. It's literally society's consciousness. Like, that's our conscience. Our conscience is us having reasons why we shouldn't do something. And so in religion, commonly you'll see people say, well, the devil made me do something bad, or the devil is tempting me, when really it's actually our own vices and our own desires that are driving those things for us to do. And so the devil is something that we pin our consciousness on, because it's easier for us to just say it's something separate than actually admitting that we are experiencing something that we're struggling with. And so it's a way for us to kind of give, like, the devil is kind of our society's poltergeist in that way. Like, a lot of what we don't want to experience, we throw at that because we don't want to experience it. We don't want to have to deal with it. And so in my own spiritual practice, and I understand everybody's going to think differently, and that's totally fine. Like, I'm very open about people seeing things from a different point of view, and I actually encourage that, because that's how we learn.
Right.
On a personal level, I believe that our goal and our purpose for being here is experiencing things and understanding as much as we can on a human level why that thing happened and what we can do to address it while we're here on a human level. So it's just something else we can work through in therapy.
So it sounds like it's almost all boiled down.
It's
like
great.
A self-awareness adventure is basically
yes.
it's all boiled down.
Essentially. Absolutely. Yeah, it's really, really interesting to see, like, how everything works together. It's a huge spider web. It's a huge spider web. Everything comes back to source and spirit in general.
Yeah. Did you have any more questions, Brett?
Yes.
Oh, Lord.
She's like, yeah.
Should I just hit silence and throw it out?
I know, right? Well, wait, there's 4. Oh, I'm sorry, 3. One's a 2-parter. Okay. So these are from Facebook.
Okay.
And the next one is a poltergeist considered intelligent?
Yes. So, because your consciousness and your energy is creating that being, your poltergeist is actually your subconscious. So, which means that it has a consciousness, but a lot of times, people get really confused, because if you have like a paranormal investigation, and you're interacting with a poltergeist, it either doesn't answer, or when it does, it's things that you already knew, or things that you knew about but didn't want to admit. So when you have no answer from it, it's probably because the person dealing with things isn't aware of why that's there, or it might be like suppressed trauma that they don't know about. Or if it's stuff that they do know about, it will be like you see it all the time on ghost hunting shows, where people will be like, oh, this poltergeist said something about your dad, and they're like, oh shit. And they're like, actually, yeah, and that makes sense. And then they go into this whole thing about this history, right? And so yeah, I would say that it is sentient in a way. Yeah, absolutely.
So interesting. Oh my
Or
gosh.
shizzle.
For show. Okay, what about places that are known for that activity for many years? So I don't remember what we were talking about
Yeah. So, I would imagine what they're talking about is like stone tape theory.
Yeah.
So this is actually separate from poltergeists. So poltergeists are people's subconscious incarnate, right? In a way, spiritually incarnated. However, spiritual activity goes into this is so exciting. So
I love it.
spiritual activity in places like, let's say, an old castle in Ireland, right? That's real fucking old. That's really old. You can just beep that out. I'm so sorry. I curse like a sailor. This is really hard for me. So you go to an old castle in Ireland and you are experiencing crazy activity from spirits who have been there forever, right? The reason why that happens is because when you are, this is so exciting for me to talk about. So when you're a spirit left behind, let's say that this is your past self left behind, okay? You need to have continuous energy in order to survive, because energy needs to have some sort of source. So that's why they drain batteries. That's why they drain people's energy. That's why things like that happen in paranormal experiences for them to manifest. Because as paranormal investigators, we know that they need energy to cause those things to happen. However, when they have situations where they can gather as much energy as they can, they're going to scare you, because you know what happens? Your aura goes boom, and they're able to take up all that energy that happens, which is why they'll show up in scary forms, which is why they'll show up in forms that you know that you're afraid of. They'll show up in their death state, which is the way that they looked when they died, because it's scarier. And by making us feel those things, it's like this involuntary gift of energy to them that they can then take and use to survive on. So with places where you're not getting a lot of interaction, you'll eventually see the activity cease, because it's just, if someone isn't afraid of them or isn't loaning energy in some way, and if they don't figure out how to take energy from our electronics now, then they just fade away and they just cease to exist. So it's a lot. It's a lot of information. This is the encyclopedia of Q&As.
Yeah, right. Okay, and the next one is actually a two-parter.
Okay.
Slightly. So this is from Tammy, and she's saying her son is now 7, but has been able to see and hear spirits since he was old enough to talk, and it scares her, even though she knows not to be after watching you. But what does she say to him while it's happening? And that he says he hears it in his head and it freaks her out. And she essentially wants to know, why are they communicating with him?
This is so exciting. Okay, so so I get really excited about this because our children are the next generation, and the way that they experience spirit is going to be so different than how we experience spirit, because our society is so much more open to this, and it makes me so excited. So your son is experiencing spirit because it sounds like he's clairaudient and clairvoyant, which means he can clearly hear and clearly see them, which is actually really cool. Congrats, you made a great kid. So if he himself is not afraid of them, you probably have no reason to be afraid of them. And the reason is because kids are just by default more open to spirit than we are. They experience more things. They're more in tune with it because they've just recently been born. So they have less of society's standards and expectations on them, and conditioning that causes them to doubt their experiences. So to encourage him to have those experiences and have a good experience, it's really important to establish ways that he can protect himself, and ways that he can get in touch with his spirit guides and angels, and so that he knows that he has things that he can call on if he were to ever get scared. And by doing that, and by giving him those tools, he's seeing that you're not afraid of it. Because if he sees that you're afraid of it, it's like having a dog see that you're afraid. They're going to be afraid, because they're like, wait, what's happening? Like, wait, why do I need to be afraid of this? Right. Because suddenly we're afraid. Kids are the same way. If you have a kid that is experiencing something and they say, oh, I'm seeing a man standing over there, and you're like, a man? And they're like, oh, yeah. And you're like, what does he look like? And they're like, I don't know, he's big. And you're like, oh my God, why is he there? And then they start getting freaked out because you're freaked out. So when your child brings up something that they're experiencing, all you have to do is say, oh, really? That's really interesting. Can you tell me more about it? They're like, well, he's big and he looks like this. And you're like, oh, he has lots of eyes? Why do you think he has lots of eyes? And they're like, well, it kind of looks like a spider face. And you're like, oh, that seems a little bit concerning. Do you feel concerned? And they're like, oh, a little bit. And you're like, you know what? I think that's good. If you don't feel concerned with them, are they saying anything mean? And you're like, well, no, they haven't said anything mean. You're like, okay, well, do you want to ask them why they're here? What they want? Maybe they want to play. And you're like, okay. So then they're asking these questions and you're putting them in the driver's seat while being the passenger. And that's so important. Please give your kids independence with talking to spirit. Don't try to intervene, because what they're going to do is they're going to rely on you when they're scared instead of actually using their own tools to interact with spirit. And if you're more shut down than they are, then they are literally interacting with a brick wall to get to spirit, and they're still having these experiences without knowing how to protect themselves. So what you can do is, if they do get scared, if they're in a situation where they're like, Mom, there's this really scary man showing up and I don't know what to do, what you say is, oh, you know what? You have friends. You have really cool friends and that can take him away. Do you want to call on them? They're like, yeah, actually, I really do. So you can give them examples, like Archangel Michael is a really common one. If you believe in Jesus, you can say you can call on Jesus. If you believe in something else, you can use your ancestors. Like you can ask, your grandma to come in or something like that. And what they can do is they can get familiar with calling on their beings around them, whether that's spirit guides, angels, spirit animals even. They can call on them to protect them so that they know that they are able to do that and protect themselves individually rather than relying on you to do it for them. Because if you say, you know what, I'll handle this because I'm the adult, then what you're going to do is you're going to start saging or doing whatever you want to do to protect them. But that being is still interacting with them because they're there for the kid, not for you. Right. So by giving them the ability to take the driver's seat and be in charge of the situation, you're giving them more confidence as well as giving you peace of mind, because you don't have to worry about if they wake up at 2 a.m. and have something scary happen. They can say, oh, Archangel Michael, can you take this person away? And usually that will help them. And then that makes them more comfortable interacting with their angels and spirit guides. And then the car self-drives itself. It's great. But you can also give them physical tools that they can use to help remind them that they have friends. So, for example, you can give them a crystal that they have. You don't have to put intention in it or anything, just something pretty that they can hold. Or you can give them a stuffed animal that you can just hold it and say, I call on her guides and angels, or his guides and angels, to be attached to this bear or this stuffed animal, so that when he calls on you, then, when he takes this and he's scared, then you come in. And that's really all you have to do. It's a very simple project or process, but a lot of us tend to get really scared about relying on our kids to have that independence, because as parents, you want to protect them. They're your kids. And in a physical sense, you need to protect them because they're kind of incapable of doing things. Maybe they can't pour a glass of milk without spilling it. But on a spirit level, they're so much more advanced than we are. And it's actually something that we try to get in the middle of as parents, just as a default, because that's what we're used to on a human level. But on a spirit level, they got this shit. They're really advanced. So yeah, just give him some confidence in reacting and dealing with spirit on his own, and let him talk to you about it if he feels comfortable with it, and take notes if you can, but just try your best. Even if it scares you, try your best to not act scared, because it gives him a reason to be scared, and when he might not have to be, because the big man might be Michael. He's huge. He's 9 feet. So he's big, but he might seem scary because he's big, but he's probably not bad.
Other comments and questions from Tammy as well. Just a note, her son is afraid, so I got that wrong.
Okay.
Okay. And then she's asking, does he just say, Jesus, please take the spirit away when he's scared because he's terrified?
Yeah. So what you can do is if he's scared, you can say, do you want us to call on them together? We can do that together. So kind of build his confidence in doing it, because sometimes they get really nervous or like shy about doing it themselves. So what you can do is have a little poem that you say. You can make a little poem to call them in, or you can just say, I call on Archangel Michael to come and protect me because I'm scared. Can you please clear my energy of anything that's negative? Or something really simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. Angels, spirit guides, anything like that come right away when we call it, even if we don't understand or see or feel that they're there. So usually just by having that intention in their head and knowing that they can do that, they'll you can do that and then say, oh, did anybody show up? And if they say, no, I don't know where they are, then you can say, okay, look around the room. Let's see if there's any other beings here that can help us. And then when they do find a being that feels good for them, that's either a spirit guide or an angel, because they're more familiar with that energy than we are. And they can bring those in. And then try to get them comfortable with getting to know them. Like give them a name. If they don't share their name, give them a name so that they know who to call on. Familiarity is going to be your friend here. It's just having a familiar saying that they can say, or a familiar being that they can interact with. And it might be that when they have a familiar being, they're interacting with it a lot more. Like that invisible or imaginary friend interaction where they're like starting to color with the beings and starting to play with the beings. And that's okay, because as long as they're positive and aren't trying to scare your child, it's usually just a spirit guide or an angel. I did used to live with a 4-year-old who would interact with Archangel Gabriel all the time. Like he would be like making funny faces at her and she'd be laughing and stuff. Mm-hmm. So they do interact with them after they start getting comfortable with them, because she was scared at first when she was interacting with him. She was like, there's a man in the hallway. And I was like, oh, that's just Gabriel. He's playing with you. And she was like, oh. And then she wasn't afraid because she was like, oh, someone else sees him and like, that's fine. So, familiarity is a good one.
It's all simple, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. It's simple, but it seems complicated.
Right. All right. Should we jump back into our other questions?
Yeah, you were just speaking about angels, so maybe why don't we jump to that line of questioning that we had there. We have a few questions regarding angels in the hierarchy, actually.
Okay.
So you're down to go down that rabbit hole.
Always. Let's follow the buns.
Let's do it.
All right. So our question was, you've been known to work with angels regularly. How would you describe them? And do you agree with the common understanding of what they are?
Yeah. So a lot of people get really confused when I say that I don't believe in God, but I believe in angels, because it's very commonly assumed that they're connected. And if you look at spirit in more of just the source energy sense, it makes sense. If you look at it as one singular thing of like, if you don't believe in God, you don't believe in angels because they're connected, it doesn't make sense, because spirit is just, it's the bottle, right? Like we're all seeing it from the different points of view. So who's to say that the bottle isn't related to the cup? The cup is just inherently part of the bottle. So that's one thing that I commonly get asked. As far as angels go, there's 2 different. Camille, stop. I'm sorry. Okay, so he just is. I'm sorry. He does random things like that. So angels they usually come in 2 different forms. They have their form that they typically show us and is commonly associated with angels, which is like the human being with wings, right? Which I've actually never seen them use their wings. Disappointment. That's disappointment. But I have seen their wings. I've seen them with wings because they know that that's what we assume. If they showed up in their astral form, we would all be like, get the hell away from me. You've got 20 eyes and 10 legs. I don't want anything to do with it. Because it's just on the astral realm, they don't need to have a familiar, like a human form, because that's just how they are. So it's like dressing up for work. You wouldn't show up to work in your sweatpants and a dirty top. Like, you would go in a nice, suit or something like that. And that's kind of how angels treat us. They're like, oh, we're going to work, so we need to dress up. And so they put on their bodysuits. I've never actually seen an angel in their astral form. I just have never really cared to ask them to show up in that form. But I'm sure it would look cool if they did. With that, that's the common assumed presence of an angel. Different angels will show up in different ways. So, for example, I said Archangel Michael is 9 feet tall. It's true. He's 9 feet tall. Like, he's huge. He doesn't need to be human size. Like, he can show up in all of his glory. So, he's 9 foot tall, super big. Uriel is also very tall. I think he's like 8 feet or something. But then there's angels like Azrael, the angel of death, who's only 6 feet tall. And you're like, why the size difference? Why did you do that? And the reason why is because seeing someone when you cross over who's 9 feet tall might be a little bit intimidating. That's a lot to deal with. Like, you're like, okay, whoa, who the hell are you? Whereas Archangel Azrael purposefully comes across with no wings, usually wears a suit, and it usually appears about 6 feet tall. And I've asked him why don't you show up as like 10 foot tall when you can? And he was like, because if you saw a 10 foot tall being on the other side when you crossed over, you're already scared because you died. Would you feel comfortable going with me? And I was like, oh, yeah, fair enough. And he was like, so I always show up around the same height that they are, or in a normal height that they're used to being around, because I don't want to scare them. My purpose is to help them and help interact with them and make them feel comfortable as possible and not freak them out to be like running the other way. So typically what you're comfortable with is how they'll show up. And people have said, okay, well, why is Archangel Gabriel sometimes shown as like a woman, right? Because sometimes Archangel Gabriel is seen as a woman, and you're like, what the hell? Or like Archangel Ariel is seen as a man sometimes. I've always seen Gabriel as a man, and I've always seen Ariel as a woman. Maybe I'm biased. I don't know. But one reason why they do that, because I have asked Gabe, like, why do you show up as a woman? He's like, honestly, it's because they're not comfortable with men. Like, if I need to interact with them and they're not comfortable with men, like maybe they've had trauma, I'm not going to go in as a man and have them running away from me. Like, I need to interact with them, so I will interact with them as a woman. Because angels are androgynous. They don't have genders. They appear to us in the way that we're comfortable seeing them. So if you are comfortable with seeing Gabe as a man, then he's going to show up as a man. If you're comfortable with seeing him as a woman, he's going to show up as a woman. But their energy is androgynous. It doesn't show up as male or female. I just categorize them as male and female because that's how they appear to me. But it might be different for everybody. Like, Lucifer might show up as a woman to some people. Like, it really just depends. So
I just had the flash of the guy from Rocky Horror Picture Show in my head when you said that. You know what I mean?
I don't know why. I've never seen that movie.
Oh my god. No.
I still need to see it. I still only saw The Craft earlier this year. Like, I know. I was like kind of disappointed in myself. I was like, dang, it took me so long to watch this. But I grew up in a Christian Baptist household, so that right there just explains that away.
So in terms of angels, then, what do you feel is like their actual purpose here on the earth plane when they interact with us?
Okay, so one thing that's really funny is that people assume that the angels are like absolutely universal, and they're not. They're not. They're actually only assigned to Earth. Yeah, they're only assigned to Earth. They're only assigned to our human race because, first of all, we babies in the universe. Like, let's just be honest. Like, we babies. So they're like the babysitters of Earth, and mostly because Earth is literally a training ground for our souls, and because of that, we need some assistance because we're a lot less spiritually aware than other galaxies, other universes, other planets that you can incarnate on as a different being. Like if you incarnated as an alien, you're going to have a lot more spiritual understanding than you would as a human. And I'm not really sure exactly why that is. I've never asked them because I think there's a part of me that doesn't want to know. But we just need a little bit of training wheels. So there are training wheels. And another question that people also have about angels that's really common is, well, where did angels come from if there is no God, right? They came because they created themselves. They literally just, as their own consciousness, decided to like come from source to help out when Earth was created into what it was. So
they're basically our babies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. We're basically in a big kindergarten. Like this, we're just the little toddlers running around in the universe, and people are like, "Oh, you're going to Earth? Good luck." Like, be careful for the baby gates. Like, we just, yeah. And in terms of like spiritual advancements and everything like that, I think that's why when we interact with spirit and when we interact with aliens, they're so patient with us. They're so like, oh, you have questions about that? Of course. Like, how would a kindergarten teacher interact? Oh, you're feeling feelings? Of course, tell me about it. Like they're very understanding because they're just like, oh, these people don't even know. Like, we need to actually be kind of like understanding. I have had a couple spirits just be like, oh my God. Just like, oh my God, why are you asking that question again? But most of the time they're really understanding. So yeah, they're basically just our babies, and they're just there to help us out.
On that note, for those that are interested in communicating or working with the angels, like what techniques would you recommend?
Yo, Archangel Michael, you there? Literally, it's actually really that simple. I think people, because of stories that you hear in the Bible or stories from people who have had near-death experiences and things like that, we expect this very grandiose experience with angels and spirit in general, I think. And the truth is that 9 times out of 10, probably 99.9% of the time, they're not going to show up in your living room. They're not. Like, they're not going to show up in your living room in a physical form and being like, I am Archangel Gabriel and I have to tell you about your tax returns are due. You know, they're not going to do that because, one, it would be scary as hell. Their energy is very, very intense. And so typically they're not going to show up that way unless something crazy major is happening and they're like, you need to get out because there's a meteor coming. Like, they're not going to do that. And so when we call on them through prayer, through intention, or just by saying, you know, I call on Archangel Michael to help me, you know, through this situation, they'll be there, but they tone down their energy a lot because energy, just the way that you would feel the hairs on the back of your neck go up when you feel something that might be negative, the same thing happens with angels. Like, you might feel that rush of energy and that might scare you and shut down your abilities. So when you call on something and something comes in, instead of being scared, just be like, oh, okay, they're here. Like, it's just going to be this more comforted feeling that you're going to feel when they're around. And some people aren't going to feel them. Some people are just going to feel like there's no change, but that doesn't mean that they're not there. It might just mean that your abilities are still in the beginning stages of being open and receptive. So you have to look at it as we're sponges, right? We're all sponges, and sometimes when we get scared, we soak up water. And if you are already full of water as a sponge, you can't feel extra water trying to come in. Like any water around you is going to feel the same as the water inside you. So by getting rid of that water that's in the sponge, like that conditioning that society has for us, we're able to be more aware of all that new water around us, the fresh water that's not dirty and things like that, so that we're able to actually feel when angels and spirits and things like that come in. Because the more you open yourself to your spiritual experiences and your gifts, the more you're going to notice and the more you're going to experience.
Look at Brittany's face. Like, okay, too much for my little preschool baby earthling brain.
Like, honestly, when people get really confused about these things, I'm like, honestly, I get it. Like, half of the time I'm just, when I'm interacting with spirit, like when I was first talking to them about these things, I didn't understand it. Like, they were telling me all these things and I was just like, talk to me like I'm 5. Because I have no idea what you're saying. And they're like, okay. And then eventually down the line, I would be like sitting there at 2 a.m. and I'd be like, oh, duh. So it takes time. It's a lot of information. It's like literally trying to learn the existence of life in one sitting. You can't eat the whole chocolate cake at once. You're gonna get sick. You got to do it in doses, thin slices.
I love it.
Great.
It's true. Is it my turn now?
If you want.
Where are we in the questions?
Yeah, okay. So it is your question, but I can ask if you like, because I know you're also checking the public questions.
Oh yeah, there actually haven't been any, but just to put that out there, if anyone else wants to submit a question, go right ahead.
Okay.
I'm monitoring that. All right. So some religions believe in hierarchy. Wow, can't say that word. Of angels, in which archangels are actually in a lower order. Have you worked with any other angelic entities such as seraphim, dominions, or thrones?
Yes. So I haven't worked with anything other than the seraphim as far as like the higher levels go. Honestly, I think if I experienced anything stronger than a seraphim, I'd probably poop my pants. Like they're really intense energy. I would compare in the hierarchy of universal energies, I would actually say star beings have a very high energy, but seraphim is like just a smidge above that. And I remember the first time I experienced seraphim energy, I was in a car with my friend, and I literally just spontaneously started crying because I didn't know how to process the energy that was around the car, and that was them toning it down. I remember being terrified, but not knowing why. And I think it's because I had never felt energy like that. And I was like, whatever this is very powerful. The way that it portrayed itself to me was a completely white being with no arms, but where the arms should be was wings. And she had 3 eyes and then just like a mouth and then like a very simple like form of like a humanistic form. And that's obviously not their true form. That's the form that they take on to help us feel comfortable, which you got 3 eyes. Like, like that's as comfortable as we're going to get. So they're usually not going to show up in their astral form because when they do, there's even more energy involved. And usually we can't handle that energy. So that I think is the highest thing that I've experienced, but it's kind of hard to do hierarchies because essentially all of them do the same thing, and really the real reason why we usually call on archangels and stuff like that is because we associate them with being good, and by being good we put them at a notch higher than other things, whereas spirit guides can usually do the same things as angels, but they're just seen as lower because they're not as well known as something that can help us. So with angels, in energetic levels, because that's really what we're talking about. In strength of energy, I would say it's us, animals, because if you're going to try to fight me on that, I will fight you. It's us, animals. We're about the same level as human spirits. Then there's spirit guides. There's elementals. So like elementals, creatures, gargoyles, gnomes, fairies, things like that. Yes, unicorns exist. That's a thing. Spirit guides, angels, like guardian angels, archangels, star beings, and then seraphim. As far as like the beings that I've interacted with, gods and goddesses would probably fall in the same realm energetically as between guardian angels and archangels, I would say. But that's just energetic levels of what it feels like. Because a lot of people are like, well, how do you know that they're there, or what it is when you tune into something and you can't see it physically? Like if I go into a dark room and there's beings in there, I'm not going to be able to see them without lights on. Like that's just the way that I see them. And so if I go into a dark room and there's a star being, a spirit guide, and an angel there, I'm going to go in and I'm going to feel the energy. It's kind of like echolocation, and different vibrations will send off different patterns. So for like angels, it's going to be like this. And for star beings, it's going to be like this. And for seraphim, it's going to be like this. So it's like different vibrations that you feel, and that helps you to identify those beings. So someone just getting started with spirituality and just getting comfortable with their gifts might not be able to identify those different vibrations, those different energies. But that's why the EMF detectors like go off at a certain level, like because higher beings are going to set it all the way to the end, whereas like human spirits might notch it up a little bit, you know?
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Yeah, that does
so
make
that you did bring up star beings, which is a good segue to our safety question for you.
Aliens!
So you actually refer to yourself as a star seed. So
Yes.
Could you kind of explain that a little bit and explain how that relates to us?
Yeah, so star seeds, which a lot of people are like, oh, well, I'm a star being, and I'm like, okay, so not quite. Star beings is the term that I use to describe aliens, because aliens actually is seen as a derogatory term in terms of working with them. Extraterrestrials and star beings is usually the term that they prefer, but I call them aliens because it's like a term of endearment to me. So most people that I interact with, I just call them aliens because that helps people understand what I'm talking about. But in my own personal practice, and usually when I'm talking about them, I'll just refer to them as star beings because that's how I interact with them. But star seed is a soul that has had different lifetimes on different planets and different galaxies. So someone who had their first incarnation from spirit as a physical entity on a different planet would be considered a star seed. And a lot of people are like, well, we're all technically stardust, so doesn't that mean that we're all star seeds? And yes and no. We're all technically stardust, that's true. But we don't all have lifetimes on different planets. Some people have only ever had physical existence on Earth, and those are what I call Earthlings because their energy, depending on the person and how many lifetimes they've had on Earth compared to other planets and stuff, their energy feels different. So people who have all Earth times, like Earth lifetimes, will feel very grounded. They'll be a lot more calm, and they tend to just be very go with the flow people, like super chill. Like they're just really, really chill because they've been here 1,000 times and they know how to do shit. People who are star seeds might not understand society's norms as well. They might be really confused by things like money and why we have those things, because on other planets they don't have those things. They can be really scared of normal things like pregnancy and stuff like that. They're like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, we do that separate from the body, not in the body. So different things, like I remember growing up, I was like so upset about math because I was like, Mom, I don't understand. Like, this doesn't make any sense. I never had to do this before. And she was like, yeah, because you're just learning it now. And I was like, no, I've never had to do this before. Like, I don't understand it. Or like even pregnancy, like, oh, it scared me like so bad. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, that's so scary. And it never made sense to me until I talked to a couple star beings, and they were like, oh yeah, we don't have money. Like, that's just not something that we do. We like exchange energy, we exchange things. We just have like an energy understanding system that we use. Or they use pods to grow things instead of other things. Same with like concepts like same-sex marriage and things like that. Like, not to get political, but that's something that on other planets is just, it's not weird, because most of the star beings are androgynous. There is no gender, or there is no he or she. And usually the reason why I categorize it as he or she is because my human understanding, that's the way I categorize it. So there's certain characteristics that will let someone know that they're a starseed, and one of the major ones is that you don't feel like this is your home at all. Like, when you look at the stars, when you look at the galaxies, you feel super, super homesick. You feel really disassociative with being on Earth. Like, it doesn't feel like this is real. It doesn't feel like you should be here. It feels like you should be somewhere else. As a kid, I was always getting homesick, and I would just walk outside at night, like in the moonlight, and just stare at the stars and get really, really sad because I was like, Mom, I'm not supposed to be here. Like, I don't understand. And she was like, well, yeah, you're here. And I was like, no, I'm at home, but I'm not home. Like, this is not my home. And I would get really, really upset about it. And, it wasn't until I had an experience with a star being channeler who actually confirmed a lot of things for me that I had always kind of known growing up, but never had confirmation for. So things like feeling homesick, I would always naturally look at the constellation of Orion because it was just where I felt drawn to. Like, I was always able to find it in the sky, no matter what time of year it was. Like, I was always able to know where it was. And I just never thought anything of it. I just thought, oh, well, it's a nice constellation. Like, it's nice, it's recognizable. And when I went to the channeler, it was actually really funny. I actually kind of feel bad about this. If she's watching, I'm so sorry. But when I first went to her to have that experience, I was standing there and I didn't know what to expect because I had only channeled myself, but I hadn't experienced other people channeling. And she started like chanting, and I was like, oh, shit. I was like, what is going on? Like, is she okay? And then all of a sudden it was just a different being there, and I just started sobbing because what it felt like was walking through the door to seeing people that you hadn't seen in forever. Like, it felt like I was in the room with family. And I started sobbing, and they were like, oh my God, you're here. And I was like, I'm here, blah, blah, blah. So I was like hugging her and or them, and like talking to them. And I was like, okay, don't influence anything. Like, I want to make sure that this is real, right? And so I said, I'm so sorry. Like, I just, I feel so emotional because I feel like I haven't seen you in forever. And they were like, yeah, it's been a really long time. And they said, but I'm glad that you're here. And they said, yes, your assumption is true. Like, you are from Orion. You're from that system. I didn't tell her anything like that before I got in there. And she just told me all of the roots of my starseed lifetimes, and it all made sense. But it was confirmation for me that, like, I wasn't crazy. Because when I first started seeing aliens, I was like, okay, this is the crazy point. Like, this is the crazy point. This is where I stop being like that cool spiritual girl and start being the crazy lunatic. And I didn't tell anybody about seeing aliens for a while because I was just like, yeah, I'm that alien girl. Because as soon as you start talking about that, people are like, oh, And then they just are like, no, everything you say from here on out is like invalidated in my mind. But if you believe in human spirits, it's really not that far-fetched to believe in aliens.
Right.
And going into aliens, a lot of people wonder, like, well, why haven't we seen them physically? Why haven't they come here? And I was like, they have. And they're like, okay, well, why don't they come visit us more often? And I was like, have you seen the way our government acts with, like, unidentified ships? Like, like I did sit down with a Gray at some point a couple of years ago, because my brother was like, oh, well, ask them why they haven't shown up. And I said, why haven't you shown up? And they went, you don't know the answer to that question? They were like, because we'll get shot out of the sky. They were like, if you had people shooting at you all the time when you came in, you probably would stop going there. And so they usually come in astral form because it's just safer for them. That's really one of the only ways that they can interact with us without being attacked. And there are ones, like physical ones on the planet, but you're not going to hear about that right now because, you know, secret. It's secret. Don't come for me, FBI. I swear. I'm not doing anything else wrong. I pay my taxes and everything. But yeah, I mean, it's just our society, I think, is getting close to being ready. Like earlier in 2020, I actually predicted us having a breakthrough as far as like knowing about that stuff. Back from 2017, I was talking to Star Beings on a live stream, and Austin asked when is my brother, he asked, when are we going to experience like having a breakthrough in understanding of that? And I said, 2020. Like they told me 2020, I told him 2020. And sure enough, they released all these videos from the Pentagon that were like, oh, hey, look, UFOs. And everybody was just like, oh, yeah, global pandemic. Like, we couldn't process it because we're already dealing with, like, our lives being turned upside down. And actually, that's good. It was a way for us to kind of integrate that without freaking people out because we had too much we were dealing with at the time. So it's probably good timing. Like, quick, release the tapes. People are distracted.
We actually have a question that came in from YouTube from Luca, and his question is, are there good or bad aliens?
Yes. So just like there are good and bad people, there are good and bad aliens. Yes, abduction is real. That's a whole other rabbit trail. But abduction can happen from both good and bad aliens. And the interactions will be different depending on what it is. And good aliens are very much for helping us expand in our society, learn how to integrate tools and different techniques to help us advance as a spiritual race and as physical people. But the bad ones just really don't care about us. They just want to analyze us and kind of play with us like rats in a cage. Whereas the good ones are actually like I guess if I was seeing it in a certain way, if metaphorically, the bad ones are the scientists taking the mice and just poking and prodding at them and not really caring about how the mice feel about it. And the good ones are the scientists that have the mice in the cage, but they're going to treat them kindly. Like if they have to poke at us and stuff, they're like, I'm so sorry. Like, I just need to know a little bit more about your race, and I'm trying to like understand more. And they're very much about like not scaring us, which is why a lot of them don't show up to people. Spirit, if one thing is consistent across all boards, is spirit does not want to freak you out. Like, if they do, trust me, they feel real bad about it. Like, they're just like, I'm so sorry. Like, I was just trying to say hi, welcome home. Like, and I accidentally knocked over the candle. I'm so sorry. But they're usually really, they're actually really silly and sweet to interact with. But most of us are just like running the other way, and they're just like, oh. Bye, friend. So it makes me really sad, like when people are on social media sharing these videos and they're like, oh my god, what's happening? And I'm like, oh, look, the ghostie's trying to talk. Like, he's trying to interact. Like, say hello. And like there's this one girl on TikTok who has a ghost that like keeps trying to do her laundry and stuff.
I saw that.
And I just
I saw that too.
yes, I was like, that's so cute. That's so cute. And like he's helping. Like he's helping. But everybody in the comments is like, quick, sage your house. And I'm like, no. Because he's just trying to make a friend. So yeah, most times spirit is just trying to interact with us because maybe they're lonely. Like maybe they just want to watch Netflix with you.
And chill.
Yeah, Netflix and chill with the ghosties. 100%.
I love it.
Then for those people who kind of, sorry, Tim, do you have something?
I was just gonna say you kind of answered my question that I was gonna ask about aliens, but if I may, I have a little slight audible I'd like to ask.
Yeah.
Just it's kind of twofold. Since you have some experience speaking to Greys and some alien, star seeds.
Yeah.
Pyramids, alien, and also are a lot of. I've read a couple books that a lot of our technology that we have today was re-engineered from craft that had crashed on Earth. Is there any validity to that? Yeah, so a lot of the advancements that we've made in technology have been because the star beings that are on Earth have shared that with us. The pyramids, I think if I can remember correctly, because the last time I had them answer that was actually a couple of years ago, so my human memory is like right. So if I can remember correctly, they didn't help them build it, but they helped them engineer things that could help them build it. Because they were like, we want to help you build the Lincoln log house, but we don't want to do it for you. Like we want you to learn. But I did actually do a reading for someone recently that was actually really insightful for myself because she was in a past life, part of a group of aliens that helped the Aztecs and the Egyptians to build their structures and create their societies. And she was part of the team of the Galactic Council that helped build that, which that goes into something else. The Galactic Council is something that a lot of people ask about, which it's literally just a group of one being from every single system, every single planet, every single thing like that represents those different things and all collaborate with what's going on. We don't have a human that represents us. We have Archangel Michael because he's the preschool teacher. So we can't be responsible for being in the Galactic Council. That's the reason why the angels kind of are the liaisons between us and the Galactic Council, because otherwise we probably would just be like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm late for lunch. Like we can't show up. It's like the kid at the grown-up table.
Right. And it's a big table. It's a huge table. But another thing is a lot of people assume that all aliens are the same. They are not the same. There's so many. There's green ones, there's gray ones, there's blue ones, there's feathered ones, there's white ones, there's purple ones, there's like all different species, and it also depends on where they're from. There's Iranians, there's Andromedans, there's Anunnakians, Greys, Avians, like there's so many different kinds. And it's, I always tell people, if the reason why people assume that all aliens are bad is probably the same reason that people are racist. Because it's essentially the same thing. Like if you think about it, like I'm not saying that everybody's racist, but just that if you think about star beings the same way that you think about humans, it just makes sense to just know that there's good ones and bad ones, and that there's different kinds, because not everybody on planet Earth looks the same. Like there's people who have darker skin, lighter skin, different bodies, things like that. And it's the same thing with star beings, is there's different types, different places that they're from, different things that they do, different ways that they deal with society, things like that. So all different. It's a completely different culture. It's really weird. Really weird.
I love it.
Yeah, it's kind of exciting. Like it makes me want to wear all the alien stuff.
So we only have about 10 minutes left because I know.
Dang, time flew by.
I know.
We love talking to you, and we still have so much to ask, but we're going to do a couple
Gonna
more.
have to schedule another one.
Hey.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Absolutely. So just kind of change subject a little bit, just to hit a few more things. So you have brought up someone who I'm a huge fan of, and that is Demille. And
Demille is so cute.
So I'm going to try to do this for those who don't know who Demille is, who haven't seen your videos, but I'm going to share, I think, what I think is the right screen. And this, you guys see this?
Wait, I think I have to add.
I don't see it yet.
Shoot.
Hold on.
Oh.
Okay, there we go. Yep. That's Demille.
This is Demille.
So cute.
He's adorable.
He honestly does act like a little dog. A lot of people get really confused about Demille because they're like, he looks like Toothless. And I'm like, I didn't choose the way he looks. Like, he just showed up that way. But he actually came in originally during a spirit board session back in May or something. I remember I was still living in the van when he came through because I was like, I'm going to do spirit board session in the middle of this parking lot. I hope I don't get stopped by cops. And so we were on the live stream and I was doing the spirit board and a entity came through and I was like, oh, what's your name? And it said, spelled out Demille. And I was just seeing this little creature like move this planchette around the board. And I was like, guys, he's really cute. Like, he's adorable because he's only about this big. Like, he's really small. And he has just never left. Like, he came in and he just never left. And he is just always around me. He's kind of like a little dog. Like, he sleeps next to me in bed. There were a couple days last week because when I get like super depressed or super sad, I kind of shut my abilities down just subconsciously. Like, it's not really something I can control. So I didn't see him for a couple days and I was actually really disappointed. I was like, I know he's here, but I can't see him. And one day I woke up and he was just staring at me. He was just like, and I was like, Demille. I was like, oh, I can see you again. And he was like so excited. But he tends to like have zoomies like cats and dogs, so he like zooms around the hotel room. I've had a couple times where I've been on live stream and people will be like, what is that black dot running around the room? And I was like, oh, that's Demille. Like, he just runs around. And he also has come through in spirit boxes. I've had Archangel Gabriel, Archangel Michael, Jesus, Demille, Nikado, which is my alien guide, all come through in spirit box sessions and say hi to audience members and stuff, which is really cool. Demille obviously doesn't talk. He can't say words, but he makes like little sounds. So we heard like a like in the background. And Gabriel has come through a couple times and been his snarky self. So he'll be like, yo guys, what's up? Which is great. It's great.
Yeah. So you describe him though as an earth elemental, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So
yes.
Do you have kind of just some information regarding elementals in general?
Yeah. So on Earth, because we have the different elements like water, earth, air, fire, things like that, you'll have elementals with each different thing. So for example, when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time in the river by my house, which actually was really gross, but it's fine now because as an adult, I'm still alive. But with the fish, like when I would see the fish swimming in the stream, I would actually see like little lights and little like creatures swimming in the water with the fish. And I always wondered what they were. And I was always just told by fairies that I was hanging out with at the time, because I was really into fairies as a kid, that they were water elementals. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like I didn't even question it. With fires, like a lot of times you'll see like little sparks and things like that, and like little tiny lights, and those are elementals. With air, you'll typically see like little, I don't know how to describe them. They almost look like crystals almost that like fly around and are just integrated in the air. So that's air elementals, but earth elementals tend to be more like creatures, like little creatures, and they just help protect earth. So different things like if someone ends up really harming earth or like that element with intention of just doing bad things, then that person will get real bad luck. Like it's a way that works. Like a lot of people, even in Ireland, will have legends of like the fairies getting angry at people. And usually it's just earth elementals coming through and being like, heck no, techno, we're going to stop you right there and tell you that's not an okay thing to do. And that person will have bad luck for a while because they just are messing with things that they shouldn't be. Which is also why, like, every time you take something from a graveyard or take something from a park or take something from there, just always say, hey, is it okay if I take this? Like, I want to take this home and treasure it. And usually that will keep you from getting bad luck or anything like that. So when you take things from graveyards, just be like, I really want to take this stone so that I can remember our interaction. And that way it's okay to take it. The spirit isn't going to follow you home. If you just take it, though, don't do that. You're taking things from people's houses, okay? You wouldn't go into a CVS and just take a pen, okay? You got to ask first. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Brittany, before we kind of wrap up a little bit, did you have anything on your end?
No, there were no other questions that came through.
Cool. So what we like to do to kind of finish up our discussions is we like to ask the same question of everyone, which is something that we refer to, well, I can't really say it because it got flagged on YouTube last time, but it's shizzle moment. So that's a moment a lot of investigators have where, like, okay, you think you know what's going on, but then something happens and you're like, oh shizzle, this is real.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So have you ever had a moment that stands out to you where you're like, oh my God?
I have definitely had an oh shizzle moment. So that moment, I'm sure you guys are familiar with Virginia City and the Washoe Club. If you're not, where have you been? Virginia City was my old stomping grounds. That's where I investigated the most when I lived in Nevada. And I went to the Washoe Club to investigate a couple times. And there's so much there, which, by the way, there is no demon in the Washoe Club. It's actually just a gargoyle. But it's very commonly assumed to be a demon because it looks like one and it growls because it's protective. Anyways, there are a lot of spirits there. And there was one time that we went to investigate there and I was really excited because I was like, okay, I'm starting to see more things again because I was just opening up my abilities again from having them kind of ignored as a teenager. And so I was seeing all these spirits walk around, and the museum was where we had all of our stuff because we were going to stay overnight, and the front half of the building was still open, like the bar and things like that. So people were still, having drinks and talking and stuff like that. But then there's a doorway where that little staircase goes, right next to the men's bathroom, where there's those two doorways and then the museum part. So I was in the museum part, and in the museum, there's a doorway that, sorry. This is my everyday. So there's a doorway that goes to a staircase that goes up the outside of the building to the upper floors. And that's a really heavy door. It's a really heavy door, and it gets stuck and jammed a lot. So you really have to pull it closed, like with all of your strength, all of my strength, because I'm tiny. Like, this is it, kids. So I have to pull all of my strength to close it. And the group was like, hey, we're going to go upstairs. Does anybody volunteer to watch the stuff downstairs? And I was like, it's me. That's going to be me. And they were like, okay. So I was down there all alone physically. And I was seeing all these spirits walk around. And I was like, okay. So I saw this little piece of paper on the table. It was like this little straw wrapper. And I said, if there are any spirits here, can you move this piece of paper? And I was like, just like waiting. And I just looked up, and they were all like, No, move it yourself, girl. And so I was like, okay, you know what? That was actually really rude of me. I was like, I'm so sorry. And they, like, the group had closed the door. It was like the middle of winter. They closed the door before they went upstairs, like really slammed it closed. And I was like, I'm so sorry, guys. Like, I didn't mean to be rude. I know that I'm in your space right now, and it's so rude of me to just go in and be like, move something, do this, do that. Like, that's really rude of me, and I promise to be more respectful. The only reason why I ask is because I can see you. Like, I can see you, and I feel crazy. Like, I feel like a crazy person. And I was just wanting confirmation physically that what I'm seeing isn't in my head. And so if you want to move this piece of paper, that's awesome. And I would really appreciate that. But you don't have to, because I don't want to ask you to do anything for me. It's for me as well as everybody else. And the door, I shizzle you not, went and just opened up completely. Like a spirit just literally went like this. And I just, like, and so, like, 2 minutes later, some team members came downstairs and they were like, Ariel, what the heck? Why did you leave the door open? It's cold as heck out there. And I was like, I don't know. And they were like, okay, well, we're going to close it. And I was like, okay. And I for like 30 minutes, I was just like, what the hell just happened? And of course, that's when you pull out your camera and you're like, can you do it again? And of course they didn't. But it was definitely an shizzle moment. I was like, oh shit, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. So yeah. And then after that, I was like, well, time to tell everybody about my gifts and everything. So yeah, it was pretty crazy. Yeah.
That's great. That's great validation. Instead of like the paper, they're like, watch the door open.
Yes. And that's another thing is, like, I love that there's things now in our world like spirit boxes and REM pods and things like that can help us interact with spirit. And there's been times when I've done live streams with spirit boxes and had intelligent conversation with a spirit that I was crossing over. Like, we all heard it on live stream. This girl was lost, and I asked Archangel Azrael to pick her up, and there was a bunch of other spirits in the room. And as she got found, they were like, yeah, she's fine. Like, everybody was giving confirmation. It was really, really cool. It was a really awesome interaction that you just don't really see a lot. But yeah, spirit boxes work. I promise. Yeah.
Awesome.
And REM pods.
Yes. So thank you so much.
Of course. It was a great time. I'm sorry I talked so much, but I loved your questions. It was great, and we should definitely do it again.
Yes. We'll definitely take you up on that. And for anybody who's still watching, head to Ariel's website, and you can sign up for readings or buy some of her merchandise. Also check out her YouTube and TikTok, and she also just launched a podcast, which is amazing.
Yes. I just launched a podcast. We're going to deep dive the way that we did in here in the podcast on subjects. So yeah, awesome. It's going to be great.
Thank you for taking the time, everybody. Check out our stuff, and we will definitely be in touch regarding setting up another one.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, guys. Have a good day. Bye.
Have a good one.